Have you ever wondered what truly defines a transformative historical figure?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe how a spiritual leader's profound claim to prophethood is genuinely established? Today, we're taking a deep dive into the extraordinary life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah, and our mission for you today is really to unpack that remarkable journey, Prophet Muhammad's life, from his birth right through to his passing. We'll highlight the pivotal events that didn't just shape his life, but actually laid the very foundations of, well, Islamic civilization itself. And crucially, we'll explore the various arguments and evidences, things presented by our sources that are put forth to establish his prophethood.
Right.
Think of it as a clear, concise pathway, sort of a shortcut to being well-informed on a topic of immense historical and religious significance. You'll gain a really thorough understanding, we hope, of these foundational claims and the compelling narrative of his life. And there are some surprising facts and rich details in there, too.
Definitely. And we're drawing from a fascinating stack of sources for this deep dive. We've got meticulous biographical accounts, detailed theological texts that really delve into the profound proofs of prophethood. So this isn't just going to be a chronological recounting, is it? It's more an exploration of how these claims are backed up through historical events, the Quran itself, and the prophet's unparalleled character. Okay, let's unpack this. Laying the foundations. Proving prophethood.
Okay, so to really get a handle on the claims of prophethood concerning Prophet Muhammad, we first need to look at what our sources identify as the primary ways such a claim can be proven. According to one of our key texts, there are generally three main pathways, three ways this happens.
Okay.
The first, and it's often seen as the most direct, the most compelling, is the occurrence of clear miracles coupled with a direct claim of prophethood.
Right, like saying, I'm a prophet, and then doing something impossible.
Exactly. This is when someone declares, I am a prophet, and then performs something demonstrably beyond normal human capability to back up that assertion. That's method one. The second method involves the accumulation of various signs and evidences. Think of it like circumstantial evidence, but on a grand scale. When you view all these signs collectively, the prophet's character, the message, the societal impact, they powerfully point to the truthfulness of the claim. It's not just one big event, it's a whole pattern.
A cumulative case, sort of.
Precisely. And finally, the third way is through affirmation by a preceding prophet. So this means earlier prophets foretelling the coming of a new one. This validates his message for those who already believe in the previous revelations, you see. Now, what's truly unique, as our sources point out, is that the prophethood of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, can actually be established through all three of these comprehensive methods. It's not just one, but all three converging.
That's a powerful framework. So multiple ways to establish it, but it sounds like one particular miracle really stands out for Prophet Muhammad, especially as something that endures, which brings us to this concept of the everlasting miracle.
Exactly. Among the numerous miracles attributed to Prophet Muhammad throughout history, and they're documented in various books of Hadith, the sayings and actions of the Prophet, and historical accounts, one really stands out. It's considered his primary, his most emphasized, and indeed his everlasting miracle. The Holy Quran.
Everlasting because it's still here. We can still engage with it.
Precisely. It's considered everlasting because it's a living miracle, accessible to all generations. It's not confined to a specific time or place like, say, parting a sea or healing someone instantly might be. Those are amazing, but witnessed only by those present. The prophet announced his prophethood and his divine message with this very book, the Quran. And he openly challenged anyone at all to produce anything like it.
And what was the nature of that challenge, the ijaz you mentioned? What exactly did it demand from those who doubted its divine origin?
Well, the challenge was, frankly, audacious, especially given the context. This was an era renowned for its Arabic eloquence, poetry, mastery of language. The Quran explicitly challenged anyone to produce something comparable. And it did so progressively. It started with this grand challenge in Surah Al-Isra, verse 88, basically saying, look, if all of mankind and all the jinn got together to try and produce something like this Quran, they absolutely couldn't do it, even if they all helped each other out.
Pretty high bar.
Extremely high. Then it was scaled back, almost as if to make it easier, though still impossible. In Surah Hud, verse 13, the challenge becomes, okay, forget the whole book, just produce 10 chapters like it, even if you have to make them up. And finally, in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 23, it's reduced even further. Then produce a single chapter, just one surah like it.
Wow. So the challenge got smaller and smaller.
Yes, but the point remained. Despite centuries of attempts, especially by its adversaries throughout history, No one has ever been able to meet this challenge, not even for a short verse. And this ongoing inability to replicate it, even today with all our modern intellectual tools and, technology, serves as a continuous testament, the sources argue, that the Quran is beyond human speech.
That really emphasizes its literary inimitability, what's called al-ijaz al-adabi. So what was it about the language itself that just captivated the Arabs back then, given, as you said, they were masters of the language?
Right, that's the fascinating part. In the age of its revelation, Arabs were, without question, the masters of eloquence, poetry, rhetoric. They lived and breathed language. And what immediately captivated and, frankly, bewildered their most renowned poets and orators was the Quran's sheer beauty of words, its intricate composition, its superior expression. These qualities are known as fasaha and balaga, essentially, unparalleled eloquence and rhetorical power.
It just sounded different.
It sounded completely different. It had a unique rhythm, a flow, profound meaning, all woven together in a way that was unlike anything they'd ever heard or composed. Consider Walid ibn al-Mughira. He was a major Quraishi poet, an orator, a respected figure, and initially a staunch opponent. After hearing verses from the Quran, he was pressed for his opinion, and he said, "By God, what he says has a sweetness to it and a freshness. Its upper part is fruitful, its lower part is flowing, and it certainly ascends and is not surpassed."
Even an enemy had to admit that.
Exactly. That's the key insight here. Even a man at the pinnacle of Arabic literary prowess, one of the Prophet's fiercest critics, was forced to admit its unique and unparalleled mastery. He couldn't explain it away as poetry or magic or anything else he knew. And other prominent rhetoricians, like Utbah ibn Rabia and Tufal ibn Amr, they also privately or publicly confessed their inability to match its literary supremacy. Now, while the pre-Islamic Arabs, maybe because of their cultural focus, primarily grasped this literary aspect, later thinkers and scholars, as Islam spread across the globe, began to discover many other miraculous dimensions of the Quran. It revealed its infinite facets in every era.
So beyond the sheer literary genius, what are these other aspects of Quranic miraculousness, the al-Ijaz al-Qurani that later thinkers uncovered, things that maybe make its miracle accessible even if you're not a 7th century Arab poet?
Absolutely. There are several, and they're quite compelling. One of the most striking is the illiteracy of the Prophet himself, his Ummi status. He was an unlettered individual. This means he never attended a school, he never studied under a teacher, he didn't read books before his prophethood.
And people knew this. It wasn't like a secret.
No, not at all. The Quran itself states this very clearly in Surah Al-Ankabut, verse 48, "And you did not recite before it any scripture, nor did you inscribe it with your right hand. Otherwise, the falsifiers would have had cause for doubt." End quote. His contemporaries, the people of Mecca, they all knew this fact about his life. It was common knowledge. So any accusation, and there were accusations, that he was secretly taught by a human, maybe a monk or scholar, is refuted directly by the Quran. It points out in Surah Nahl, verse 103, that the tongue of the one they allude to is foreign, while this is a clear Arabic tongue. The contrast is just stark. An unlettered man bringing forth a book of unparalleled eloquence and profound knowledge.
That is quite compelling. What about its revelation over time? You said it wasn't presented all at once. Was there any inconsistency? It seems like a huge challenge for any human author to maintain coherence over, 23 years?
That's an excellent point, and it highlights another really miraculous aspect. The Quran was revealed gradually, piecemeal, over 23 years, not as a single complete text delivered in one go. And during this long period, the Prophet and the early Muslim community experienced vastly different circumstances. Think about it. Times of peace, times of intense war, travel, residence, moments of joy, moments of deep sorrow, security, danger.
Life, basically, all of it.
Exactly, all of human life. Despite these diverse and often incredibly challenging contexts, the Quran maintains this remarkable consistency in its style and content from the very first revelation to the very last. This is highly, highly unusual for any human authorship. Usually authors who write even under normal, stable conditions, over time, they show variations, maybe inconsistencies in their style, their expression, their focus.
Sure, you evolve as a writer.
Right. Yet the Quran, revealed incrementally, covers this vast array of subjects: theology, history, law, ethics, nature, human psychology, all while maintaining a singular, harmonious style and content. It's seamless. The Quran itself actually points to this as a proof in Surah An-Nisa, verse 82. "Then do they not reflect upon the Quran? If it had been from any other than Allah, they would have found within it much inconsistency." It challenges people to find those contradictions. Another significant aspect is its foundation on universal laws and human nature. The Quran laid down laws and principles that our sources argue are based on immutable human nature, the fitra. It considers all dimensions of human life, the spiritual, the physical, the social, the individual. Its universal principles are presented as being applicable across all times and all environments, which is seen as a testament to its divine origin. Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, peace be upon him, articulated this beautifully. He said, "Indeed, Allah did not leave anything the Ummah needed except that He revealed it in His book and clarified it for His messenger." Basically saying everything necessary for guidance is contained within it, timelessly.
So it's not just about what it says, but also what it knew, or rather, what it revealed about the universe, about future events, things that were simply unknowable to people back then.
Absolutely, that's another layer. The Quran revealed secrets of the universe and future prophecies that were entirely unknown to humanity at the time, especially to an unlettered man living in what the sources describe as a largely ignorant society. This points unequivocally, they argue, to divine revelation.
Like what, for instance?
Okay, well, consider something like the law of gravity. Long before Newton, long before modern science formulated it, the Quran alluded to it in a very subtle verse, Surah Arad, verse 2. Allah is the one who raised the heavens without pillars that you see. The implication being there's some hidden, unseen force holding these massive celestial bodies in place, preventing them from crashing down.
Interesting. Without pillars that you see.
Exactly. Similarly, the Quran spoke of the generality of duality, this idea that everything is created in pairs way back when humans really had no scientific concept of this, applying broadly. Surah Ad-Dariyat, verse 49 states, "And of all things, we created two mates pairs that you might remember. Think protons and electrons, positive and negative charges, male and female in species. The concept runs deep in creation, and the Quran mentioned it centuries ago. These were profound scientific insights far ahead of their time, emerging from a society not known for scientific advancement."
Okay, and what about the future prophecies? You mentioned those.
Yes. The future prophecies that accurately came to pass are another strong piece of evidence presented. A really remarkable example is the prophecy about the Roman victory over the Persians. Our sources detail the context. The Sasanian Persians, who were Zoroastrians, often referred to as fire worshippers by the Arabs, had achieved a major victory over the Byzantine Romans, who were Christians, people of the book, monotheists. Now, the polytheists in Mecca rejoiced at this news. They saw it as a sign, thinking, look, the idolaters beat the monotheists. Soon we'll defeat Muhammad and his monotheistic followers, too. It was a moment of real despair for the early Muslims.
I can imagine.
Right. But then the Quran revealed verses in Surah Ar-Rum, verses 2-4, that said, "The Romans have been defeated in the nearest land, but they, after their defeat, will triumph within a few years." The Arabic term bidi sinin means between 3 and 9 years. Quote, "To Allah belongs the command before and after, and on that day the believers will rejoice." And incredibly, not only did the Romans eventually defeat the Persians within that specified time frame, but historical accounts suggest this Roman victory coincided with a major Muslim victory, the Battle of Badr. So the believers rejoiced, just as the Quran foretold, for both reasons.
Wow, that's incredibly specific.
It is. And there were other prophecies too, like allusions to the eventual conquest of Mecca, which also came true exactly as suggested. Finally, another aspect is the Quran's accounts of previous prophets. It narrates stories of past prophets, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others and their nations. The way it narrates these stories is presented as consistently rational, aligned with basic human nature, and upholding the dignity of the prophets. This is often contrasted with accounts found in some other scriptures, like versions of the Torah and Gospel available at the time, which Islamic sources view as having undergone human alteration or corruption over centuries. For instance, comparing the Quran's telling of the story of Adam with other versions highlights how the Quran avoids attributing certain actions or flaws to prophets that seem inconsistent with their divine mission.
Fascinating. So while the Quran is clearly presented as the central, enduring miracle, I'm curious, did the prophet also perform other miracles? The more immediate kind, to be similar to what we hear about other prophets like Moses or Jesus, things that convince people right there and then?
Yes, absolutely. The prophet did perform other miracles at various times, often in response to specific challenges or needs, to convince people directly. And our sources highlight a logical point here. How could Muhammad, peace be upon him, who affirmed numerous miracles for Moses, like the staff turning into a snake, the parting of the sea, and others, and for Jesus, like healing the blind and lepers, raising the dead by God's permission, not have miracles himself, especially as he's considered the seal of the prophets.
Right, people would expect it.
Exactly. People hearing about the miracles of past prophets would naturally look for similar signs. The Quran itself actually alludes to some of these other miracles performed by Prophet Muhammad. For example, the splitting of the moon. This is mentioned right at the beginning of Surah Al-Qamar, verses 1 to 2. The hour has approached and the moon has split. And if they see a sign, they turn away and say, passing magic. The context strongly suggests this refers to a specific event witnessed during his time, a direct sign shown to the Meccans, not just something about the Day of Judgment. Another major miracle often cited is the Isra and Miraj, the miraculous night journey and ascension. This was the journey from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the Al-Aqsa mosque in Jerusalem, and then the ascension through the heavens, all within a very short part of a single night. This is explicitly mentioned at the start of Surah Al-Isra, verse 1. And then there's the event of Mubahala, specifically with a delegation of Christians from Najran. After debating theological points, particularly about the nature of Jesus, the prophet challenged them to a Mubahala. This is a solemn invocation where both parties gather their families and pray that God's curse falls upon whichever party is lying.
That sounds intense.
It was. Faced with the prophet's unwavering resolve and seeing him bring his absolute dearest family members, his daughter Fatima, his son-in-law Ali, and his young grandsons Hassan and Hussein to participate in this mutual curse, the Christian delegation backed down. They chose not to proceed, essentially acknowledging, at least implicitly, his truthfulness or fearing the consequences if they were wrong. So while these and other physical miracles are documented by historians and in the Hadith collections, the Quran itself remains the central, the primary, and the everlasting proof, accessible to everyone, everywhere, always. 2. The early life. Character as a prerequisite for prophethood.
So we've talked about the Quran as this powerful, multifaceted miracle, a timeless testament. But what about the person who delivered it, Prophet Muhammad himself? Let's shift focus now to his life before prophethood, which, as you mentioned earlier, itself served as a profound set of proofs.
Indeed. The prophet's personal character and his life circumstances, even before he received the first revelation, offer really powerful evidences and signs of his truthfulness. Our sources emphasize several key aspects here, and they illustrate why even his contemporaries, including those who later became his fiercest opponents, couldn't actually deny his fundamental integrity. One of the earliest and maybe most powerful proofs was his radiant past, specifically his unparalleled integrity. Even before prophethood, he was widely, universally known among the Quraish, the leading tribe in Mecca, as Muhammad al-Amin.
Al-Amin. The trustworthy.
Exactly. The trustworthy, the honest one. It wasn't just a nickname, it reflected reality. People habitually entrusted him with their most valuable belongings for safekeeping. Think about that in a tribal society where trust was perhaps fragile. He was the go-to person for everyone's valuables. And a prime example, a famous story, is his pivotal role in resolving the Black Stone dispute. When the Kaaba was being rebuilt, a major quarrel broke out among the different Quraysh tribes. Who would get the immense honor of placing the sacred black stone back into the wall?
Right, it nearly came to blows, didn't it?
It did. The dispute threatened actual bloodshed. They finally agreed, in desperation, to accept the judgment of the very next person to enter the sanctuary area, and that person happened to be Muhammad. His solution was simple but brilliant. He had the stone placed on a large cloth, and then he asked the chief of each quarreling tribe to hold a corner of the cloth. Together, they jointly lifted the stone to the right spot. Then, he himself took the stone and placed it in the wall. His honesty and trustworthiness were so well established that all the tribes readily accepted his judgment, preventing a major conflict.
So that reputation was solid, long before any claims of prophethood.
Absolutely solid. Building on that, his purity from social contamination was equally striking, especially given the environment he grew up in. He grew up in a society that, by many historical accounts, was steeped in practices we'd find deeply problematic today. Widespread drinking, gambling, tribal warfare, injustice, and perhaps most horrifyingly, female infanticide, the abhorrent practice of burying infant girls alive. Oppression and raiding were common. Yet, despite being immersed in this environment from birth, Muhammad remained remarkably pure in his conduct and his beliefs. He was completely untouched by any of these vices or the prevailing corrupted ideas. He never participated in their pagan rituals, he didn't drink, he didn't gamble, he didn't engage in their immoral practices. This moral consistency, totally unblemished by the norms around him, truly set him apart.
That's a really stark contrast to his surroundings. And what about the message he eventually brought? Did that align with this pre-existing character?
Perfectly. His message, The actual content of the Islamic call when it came starkly contradicted and rejected the prevalent practices of his environment. It wasn't a message designed to win friends or influence people by flattering their existing beliefs. He called for absolute monotheism, the worship of one God, a law directly against the deeply entrenched idolatry and polytheism of the Quraish, who worshipped numerous idols housed in the Kaaba itself. He also called for belief in the afterlife and accountability for one's actions, which was largely denied or even ridiculed by many Meccans at the time. And very importantly, he restored human dignity, particularly to women. He vehemently opposed female infanticide and fought against their overall devaluation in society. His message was a direct challenge to the entire social and religious order. This consistency between his pure character before the call and the challenging, purifying message after the call is presented as a powerful testament.
Okay, and how did he go about spreading this challenging message? What were his methods?
That's another key point. The tools and means of his call, his dawah. He employed purely humane and ethical methods. Even when faced with violent opposition, he never resorted to the inhumane tactics that were common in warfare or political maneuvering at the time. Things like cutting off water supplies to besieged enemies, poisoning wells, destroying crops or trees. These were explicitly forbidden. In fact, he commanded his followers not to harm women, children, the elderly, monks or priests, or even to cut down fruit-bearing trees during conflict. He also insisted that fighting should only be defensive or to remove oppression, and never initiated before clearly inviting the enemy to Islam or peace first. Islam, as presented through his life, categorically rejects that Machiavellian logic, the end justifies the means. His entire biography is filled with examples of noble and humane dealings, even with his staunchest, most bitter enemies. This unwavering commitment to ethical conduct, even under duress, is seen as a sign of his divine mandate.
It sounds like his influence wasn't just personal, but it really extended to shaping the people around him in profound ways, too.
Precisely. The character of his believers, the early companions, is presented as another powerful testament to his truthfulness. The fact that prominent, noble figures, individuals known for their integrity, their intelligence, their high standing in society, sincerely embraced his call is highly indicative. These weren't, generally speaking, opportunists or people seeking worldly gain. Many of them sacrificed wealth, status, and family ties for their faith. Think of figures like his cousin Imam Ali, Salman the Persian who sought truth across empires, Bilal the Abyssinian slave who endured torture, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman. Their lives testify to their purity, sincerity, and elevated character. The argument is, if his call had primarily attracted only the downtrodden seeking material benefit or power-hungry individuals, one might question it. But instead, it drew in many of the noblest and most sincere people, which suggests the authenticity and compelling reality of his message.
Right, the quality of the followers reflects the leader.
In a way, yes. And the ultimate proof, perhaps the most visible and undeniable one, is the positive impact on society and the establishment of a great civilization. Think about the timescale. Within a mere 23 years from the first revelation to his death, the prophet fundamentally transformed the entire Arabian Peninsula. He turned people who were, in many cases, highway robbers, warring tribesmen, idol worshippers, into honest, devout monotheists united by faith. These once fragmented communities, often described as steeped in ignorance, jahiliyyah, were molded into a unified, moral, and just society. And they didn't just build a local community, they went on to build a magnificent Islamic civilization that spread far beyond Arabia, contributing massively to science, art, law, and philosophy for centuries. Remember Ja'far ibn Abi Talib's speech to the Negus, the king of Abyssinia? He eloquently summarized this transformation. He said something like, "We were an ignorant people, worshipping idols, eating carrion, committing abominations, severing family ties, treating guests badly, and the strong among us devoured the weak, until Allah sent us a messenger from among ourselves, whose lineage, truthfulness, trustworthiness, and purity we knew. He called us to Allah to worship him alone. He commanded us to speak the truth, to honor our trusts, maintain ties of kinship, treat neighbors well, and cease from forbidden acts and bloodshed."
That's a powerful summary.
It really is. The sheer scale and, crucially, the speed of this transformation from utter chaos to a thriving civilization in just over 2 decades is presented in our sources as something singular, something almost inexplicable in purely human terms. It challenges our understanding of what a single human leader, however charismatic, can achieve without divine aid. It points towards the divine nature of his mission.
Okay, so having explored how his character and impact served as profound proofs, let's now trace the very beginning of this extraordinary journey. What were the early foundations of his life? His lineage, his birth, his childhood? What set the stage?
Right, let's go back to the beginning. His lineage itself is considered highly esteemed and is meticulously documented in the sources. He was Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muttalib from the noble tribe of Quraish, specifically the clan of Banu Hashim. His ancestry is traced back through a long line of respected figures all the way to Adnan, who is traditionally considered an ancestor of the Arabs of the north, and from there, back to Ishmael, the son of Prophet Abraham, peace be upon them all. So a very noble lineage. His mother was Amina bin Wahab, also from a respected clan within the Quraysh.
And his birth. When and where did that happen?
He was born in Mecca on a Monday, traditionally cited as the 12th day of the month of Rabi al-Awwal, in the year of the elephant. This corresponds roughly to the year 570 CE. The year of the elephant refers to a famous event that happened shortly before his birth, where Abraha, the Abyssinian governor of Yemen, tried to attack Mecca and destroy the Kaaba with an army that included elephants, but was miraculously thwarted. His birth occurred about 50 days after that incident, and a really poignant detail is that his father, Abdullah, actually passed away before Muhammad was born, while on a trading journey. So he was born an orphan, a fact the Quran itself mentions later. Did he not find you an orphan and give you refuge?
So orphan from birth. How was his early life and guardianship handled?
His early life and guardianship were quite unique, especially according to Arab customs of the time for noble families. Following tradition, he was sent to be nursed in the desert by a wet nurse. This is believed to be healthier for the child and help them learn pure Arabic. He was nursed by Halima al-Sadiya, a woman from the Banu Sa'd tribe. The sources are full of accounts from Halima herself, testifying to immense blessings and prosperity that entered her life and household while the young Muhammad was under her care. Her flock increased, her donkey became faster, things like that.
Signs, even that.
Signs, exactly. It was also during this period, while he was living with Halima's family in the desert, that a truly remarkable event is said to have occurred. Shaq al-Sadr, the splitting of the chest. The story goes that while he was playing with other children, two figures, identified as angels, specifically Gabriel, appeared. They gently laid him down, opened his chest, took out his heart, removed a small black clot or speck described symbolically as the portion of Satan or potential for evil, washed the heart with Zamzam water in a golden basin, and then restored it to his chest, leaving no visible mark except, some say, a small seal. This miraculous event understandably frightened Halima and her husband, and it led to his return to his mother, Amina, in Mecca, around the age of 4 or 5.
Wow. What happened after he returned to his mother?
Tragically, his time with his mother was also short. At the tender age of 6, while returning from a trip to Yathrib, later Medina, where she had taken him to visit relatives, his mother Amina fell ill and passed away. So now he was completely orphaned. He then came under the direct care of his loving grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who was the chief of the Banu Hashim clan and a very respected leader in Mecca. Abdul Muttalib cherished Muhammad deeply, treated him with special affection, and reportedly sensed a magnificent future destined for him. However, this guardianship also didn't last long. Abdul Muttalib passed away when Muhammad was just 8 years old.
So much loss at such a young age. Who took him in then?
After his grandfather's death, the responsibility for his care fell to his paternal uncle, Abu Talib. Abu Talib was the full brother of Muhammad's father, Abdullah. Despite having many children and not being particularly wealthy himself, Abu Talib took Muhammad into his home and treated him with exceptional affection, often preferring him even over his own sons. Abu Talib would remain his devoted guardian and staunch protector for the next 40 years, playing a crucial role later when Muhammad began his prophetic mission.
What about his youth? Did he work?
Yes, like many in Mecca, he didn't live an idle life. In his youth, he worked as a shepherd, tending flocks of sheep and goats for the people of Mecca on the hillsides outside the city. This experience is often seen as significant, teaching qualities like patience, responsibility, and contemplation. Many prophets, it's noted, had experience as shepherds. Later, as a young man, he gained a reputation for honesty and reliability in trade. He started working for a wealthy and highly respected businesswoman named Khadija bint Khuwaylid. He managed her trade caravans traveling to places like Syria. It was during one such trading journey to Syria, accompanying Khadija's caravan, possibly under the supervision of her servant Maysara, that another significant encounter is reported. A Christian monk named Bahira, living in Bostra, observed the young Muhammad. Bahira recognized certain signs, perhaps a cloud shading him, or physical marks described in scriptures, which he interpreted as signs of future prophethood. He reportedly warned Abu Talib, who might have been on an earlier journey, or Maysara about Muhammad's significance and advised them to protect him, particularly from potential harm by Jews who might recognize the signs.
So, signs and recognition, even before the main event. And we already mentioned his role in rebuilding the Kaaba.
Yes, that event, the rebuilding of the Kaaba around the year 605 CE, when Muhammad was about 35, really solidified his reputation before prophethood. When the Quraish tribes were rebuilding the Kaaba after damage from a flood or fire, and they reached the point of replacing the sacred black stone, that fierce dispute broke out. As we discussed, his solution, having the tribal chiefs jointly lift the stone on a cloak, demonstrated his wisdom, his fairness, and reinforced why everyone already knew him and trusted him as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. It was a defining moment, showcasing his character years before the first revelation. 3. The call begins. Meccan period and early struggles.
So a life marked by integrity, trustworthiness, wisdom, and even these hints of a special destiny, all laying the groundwork. But then came the moment everything changed. When did the divine call truly begin? When did that shift happen from Muhammad al-Amin, the respected community member, to Muhammad, the prophet of God?
That pivotal moment, the beginning of the divine call, occurred when the prophet was around 40 years old. It didn't come entirely out of the blue, in a sense. Before this, perhaps as he matured and grew increasingly discontent with the idolatry and social ills of Mecca, he had developed a practice of seeking solitude and contemplation. He would retreat to a small cave high up on Mount Hira, Jabal Nur, a mountain overlooking Mecca. He'd spend days, sometimes weeks, especially during the month of Ramadan, in seclusion there, meditating, praying, pondering creation, and seeking truth, away from the bustle and the paganism of the city below.
And it was there.
It was there, during one of these solitary retreats in Hira, the Cave of Hira, that the first revelation occurred. The accounts describe a powerful, overwhelming experience. The archangel Jibril, appeared to him. Gabriel came to him and commanded, Iqra, which means read or recite. The prophet, being unlettered, as we discussed, was startled and responded truthfully, Ma ana bikari, I'm not a reader, or I cannot recite. The angel repeated the command twice more, perhaps embracing him forcefully each time, and each time Muhammad gave the same answer. Finally, Gabriel recited the first 5 verses of what would become Surah Al-Alaq, the clot in the Quran. Recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance, a clot. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not.
That must have been terrifying. How did he react?
Utterly overwhelming and terrifying. The sources describe him returning home immediately, his heart pounding, trembling, in a state of great fear and confusion. He rushed to his wife Khadijah and cried out, Zamiluni, Zamiluni, cover me, cover me! Khadijah, known for her wisdom and strength, comforted him, reassured him, wrapped him in a cloak, and listened to his account. Crucially, she didn't dismiss his experience. Instead, she affirmed his character, saying things like, Never, by Allah, Allah will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your kith and kin, help the poor and the destitute, serve your guests generously, and spot the deserving calamity-afflicted ones. She believed in his inherent goodness.
Her support must have been crucial.
Absolutely vital. She then took him to see her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal. Waraka was an old wise man, possibly blind by this time, who had reportedly become a Christian and had studied the earlier scriptures, the Torah and Gospel. When Waraka heard Muhammad's account of the encounter in the cave, he immediately recognized its significance. He confirmed, this is the same Nemes, the angel, referring to Gabriel, who used to come to Moses. Waraka affirmed Muhammad's prophethood and foretold that his own people, the Quraish, would eventually oppose him and expel him from Mecca, just as previous prophets had been rejected by their people. Waraka wished he could be alive and strong to support him when that time came.
So immediate confirmation from someone knowledgeable. What happened next? Did the revelations continue immediately?
Interestingly, no. Following this intense first revelation, there was a brief pause, an interruption of revelation known as the Hijra. The sources differ on exactly how long it lasted, maybe days, weeks, or even longer. This pause is seen as having served a crucial purpose. It allowed the prophet time to process the profound experience, perhaps eased his initial fear, and it also intensified his longing and anticipation for the divine connection to resume. It prepared him psychologically for the immense weight of the mission ahead. The second revelation came soon after this pause. The accounts say that while walking, he heard a voice from heaven, looked up, and saw the same angel Gabriel seated on a chair between the sky and the earth. This sight initially frightened him again, and he rushed home asking to be covered. It was then that the next verses were revealed, the beginning of Surah Al-Muddathir, the cloaked one, verses 1 through 5. O you who covers himself with a garment, arise and warn, and your Lord glorify, and your clothing purify, and uncleanliness avoid. This revelation was a direct command. Get up, start warning people, and publicly proclaim the greatness of God. This marked the true initiation of his public mission.
Okay, so the command came. Arise and warn. What were those initial stages of his mission actually like in Mecca? A place, as we've established, deeply resistant to change and heavily invested in the traditions his message directly challenged.
Right, the challenge was immense.
Yeah.
Given the dominance of idol worship and the powerful vested interests tied to the Kaaba's pagan rituals in Mecca, a direct, full-blown public invitation to abandon all that and worship only. One God would likely have been met with immediate, overwhelming hostility, potentially endangering the Prophet and any early followers. So the initial phase of his mission in Mecca, the Meccan period, began with secret dawah, a secret invitation. For the first 3 years, he privately and discreetly invited only those closest to him, people he knew personally, to be sincere, thoughtful, and potentially open to the truth.
Who were the very first believers?
The very first person to believe in him and accept his message was, naturally, his wife Khadija. Her immediate acceptance and unwavering support were foundational. Following her were his young cousin, Ali ibn Abi Talib, who was living in the Prophet's household at the time, his freedman and adopted son, Zayd ibn Haritha, and his close and respected friend, Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr, being a respected merchant with a wide social network, was instrumental in bringing others to Islam during this secret phase. Through his efforts, prominent individuals like Uthman ibn Affan, Zubayr ibn Awam, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and Talha ibn Ubaydullah, all of whom would become major figures in Islam, embraced the faith early on. So Islam began to spread quietly, forming a small but dedicated core group of believers in Mecca.
How long did this secret phase last? And what prompted the shift to going public?
This secret phase lasted for about 3 years. Then the divine command came specifically instructing the Prophet to begin the beginning of public dawah. First, he was commanded to warn his own closest relatives, his clan, the Banu Hashim, mentioned in Surah Ash-Shu'ara 2:14. He invited them to a meal and presented his message, though the reception was mixed, with only young Ali pledging full support initially. Soon after, the command came for a wider public proclamation. The Prophet famously ascended Mount Safa, a small hill near the Kaaba, and called out to the various clans of Quraish. When they had gathered, he asked them, "If I told you that horsemen were advancing from the valley behind this hill, would you believe me?" They all replied, "Yes, we have never known you to lie." He then declared, "Then I am a warner to you of a severe punishment." He invited them to abandon their idols and worship the one God.
How did that go down?
It was met largely with shock, disbelief, and open mockery, particularly from some of the Quraysh leaders. His own uncle, Abu Lahab, is famously reported to have cursed him and walked away. This marked the beginning of open opposition and hostility from the Meccan establishment. However, despite this growing opposition and pressure from the Quraysh chiefs, his other uncle, Abu Talib, the one who had raised him, provided him with crucial protection. Although Abu Talib himself apparently never formally converted to Islam, he refused, out of clan loyalty and personal affection, to hand Muhammad over to his enemies or withdraw his protection, even when the Quraysh offered him incentives and made threats. Abu Talib's steadfast protection was absolutely essential for the Prophet's safety in those early years.
But the opposition didn't stop there, did it? It escalated.
It escalated significantly. As more people, especially among the poor and the youth, began to embrace Islam, the Quraysh leadership grew increasingly alarmed. Their initial mockery and verbal abuse turned into physical persecution of the Muslims, particularly the weaker ones who lacked strong tribal protection. Slaves like Bilal were brutally tortured. When persecution failed to stamp out the new faith, the Quraysh resorted to a comprehensive boycott. All the clans of Quraysh collectively agreed to completely ostracize the Prophet, his followers, and his entire clan, the Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib, who stood with them out of kinship ties, regardless of their religion. They drew up a formal pact, hung inside the Kaaba, pledging not to marry anyone from these clans, not to buy from them or sell to them, essentially cutting off all social and economic ties. The Muslims and their Hashemite protectors were forced to retreat into a narrow valley or gorge owned by Abu Talib, known as Shib Abi Talib.
How long did this boycott last?
This devastating boycott lasted for 3 grueling years. They endured extreme hardship, hunger, and starvation. Stories tell of them eating leaves and leather just to survive. It was an incredibly difficult period designed to break their will. The boycott finally ended, not because the Muslims gave in, but due to a combination of factors. Some members of the Quraysh themselves started to feel uneasy about the severity and injustice of the boycott, especially as they had relatives among the besieged. And simultaneously, the Prophet received a revelation that the parchment on which the pact was written inside the Kaaba had been miraculously eaten by termites, leaving only the words, "In your name, O Allah." When Quraysh leaders checked and found this to be true, the boycott was finally lifted.
A reprieve, but then came more personal tragedy for the Prophet, right? The year of sorrow.
Yes. Shortly after the end of the boycott, around the 10th year of his mission, the Prophet suffered 2 devastating personal losses in quick succession. This period became known as the Year of Sorrow, Amal-Huzn. First, his beloved wife, Khadija, who had been his first believer, his constant source of comfort, support, and reassurance for 25 years, passed away. Her loss was immense. Then, only a short time later, his uncle and steadfast protector, Abu Talib, also passed away. With Abu Talib gone, the Prophet lost his primary tribal protection within Mecca. The Quraish felt emboldened, and their persecution and harassment intensified dramatically, becoming more open and aggressive than ever before.
So Mecca became increasingly untenable. Did he look for support elsewhere?
He did. With the situation in Mecca becoming unbearable after Abu Talib's death, the Prophet began seeking support outside Mecca. He made a journey south to the city of Taif, about 60 miles away, hoping to find acceptance and protection from the Thaqif tribe who dominated the city. However, his reception in Taif was even worse than in Mecca. The leaders mocked him, rejected his message outright, and then cruelly incited the town's children and rabble to abuse him, pelting him with stones until his feet bled as he was driven out of the city. It was a deeply disheartening and painful experience.
You also mentioned earlier migrations to Abyssinia. Were those happening around this time?
Yes, actually, the migrations to Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, happened earlier, even before the boycott, during the period of intense persecution in Mecca. Realizing the suffering of his followers, particularly those without strong tribal protection, the Prophet encouraged those who could to migrate across the Red Sea to Abyssinia.
He chose Abyssinia because he knew its Christian king, the Negus, Ashama ibn Abjar, was renowned for his justice and fairness. There were 2 main waves of migration.
A pivotal moment occurred when the Quraysh sent emissaries to the Negus, demanding the extradition of the Muslim refugees. The Negus summoned the Muslims to hear their side. It was then that Jafar ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin and Ali's brother, delivered that eloquent speech we mentioned earlier. He explained the state of ignorance they were in before Islam, the teachings of the Prophet, and why they sought refuge. He also recited verses from the Quran about Mary and Jesus, from Surah Maryam, which deeply moved the Negus and his bishops. As a result, the Negus refused to hand over the Muslims, granting them protection in his land. Abyssinia became a crucial safe haven for a significant portion of the early Muslim community during the difficult Meccan years. Remember, the Prophet himself didn't migrate there, but he directed his followers to go.
Okay, and amidst all this struggle, there was also a profound spiritual event, the Isra and Miraj.
Yes, occurring sometime during this late Meccan period, likely after the Year of Sorrow, was the miraculous Isra and Miraj, the night journey and ascension. This is considered a major miracle and a source of great honor and solace for the Prophet during a time of intense difficulty. The Isra refers to the night journey described in the Quran, where he was taken by the angel Gabriel from the sacred mosque, Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, to the farthest mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, riding a celestial steed called Burak. There he is said to have led all the previous prophets in prayer, signifying his status among them. The Miraj refers to the ascension from Jerusalem up through the 7 heavens. During this ascension, he met and conversed with various prophets like Adam, John the Baptist, Jesus, Joseph, Idris, Aaron, Moses, and Abraham in different heavenly realms. He eventually reached the divine presence, receiving direct commandments from Allah. Critically, it was during the Miraj that the commandment for the 5 daily prayers, Salat, a central pillar of Islam, was directly instituted. This entire miraculous journey, both horizontal and vertical, happened in a portion of a single night. When the Prophet recounted this experience the next morning, it was met with disbelief by the Quraish, but became a test of faith for the believers, with Abu Bakr notably affirming its truth without hesitation, earning him the title as Siddiq, the truthful.
A truly extraordinary event. And finally, leading up to the Hijra, the migration, you mentioned the pledges of Aqaba. What were those?
The pledges of Aqaba were a crucial turning point, the beacon of hope that ultimately led to the establishment of the Muslim community in Medina. They involved delegations from Yathrib, the city that would later become Medina. Yathrib was inhabited by several Arab tribes, particularly the Aus and Khazraj, who had been locked in cycles of internal warfare, and also by several Jewish tribes. Perhaps seeking a unifying leader or influenced by Jewish prophecies of a coming prophet, some individuals from Yathrib encountered the Prophet during the annual pilgrimage season in Mecca. There were 2 key pledges made at a location called Aqaba near Mecca in successive years. The first pledge of Aqaba, around 621 CE, involved about 12 men from Yathrib embracing Islam and pledging allegiance to the Prophet, promising not to associate partners with God, steal, commit adultery, kill their children, slander, or disobey him in what is right. The Prophet sent Musab ibn Umair, one of his companions, back with them to teach them the Quran and Islam. Musab's efforts were incredibly successful, and Islam spread rapidly in Yathrib. The following year, a much larger delegation of about 75 people from Yathrib, including 2 women, came for pilgrimage and met secretly with the Prophet at Aqaba again. This led to the second pledge of Aqaba, or the Pledge of War. In this pledge, they not only reaffirmed their faith, but critically, they pledged to protect the Prophet Muhammad as they would protect their own women and children if he migrated to their city. These pledges were monumental. They represented a formal invitation and a guarantee of protection, effectively offering the Prophet and his persecuted followers a new home and a base from which Islam could flourish. They paved the direct way for the Prophet's own migration, the Hijra, which would mark the beginning of a new chapter. The dawn of a state, Medinan period.
The challenges in Mecca were just immense, weren't they? A real test of faith and endurance. But then came that pivotal turning point you just mentioned, the Hijra, the migration to Medina. How did this truly mark a new phase? How did it transform that small, persecuted community into the foundation of what would become a new state?
The Hijra, or migration, from Mecca to Yathrib, soon to be renamed Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina, was indeed a monumental turning point. It wasn't just a change of location. It marked the transition from a phase of persecution and survival to a phase of community building and state formation. The primary reasons for the Hijra were essentially twofold. Firstly, to preserve their faith from the relentless and escalating persecution in Mecca, which threatened the very existence of the Muslim community. Secondly, it was a quest to find a safe homeland, a place where they could freely practice Islam, establish its principles, and propagate its message without fear. The pledges of Aqaba had provided that crucial invitation and guarantee.
How did the departure itself happen? It sounds like it must have been quite dangerous.
It was extremely dangerous. The Quraish were furious about the pledges of Aqaba and the prospect of Muhammad gaining a power base elsewhere. They reportedly plotted to assassinate him. The departure itself was dramatic and carefully planned. With divine permission, the Prophet instructed his followers to migrate to Medina in small groups to avoid attracting attention. Finally, he himself prepared to leave. He chose his closest companion, Abu Bakr, to accompany him. In a remarkable act of bravery and deep trust, the Prophet asked his young cousin, Ali ibn Abi Talib, to sleep in his bed on the night of their departure. This was to deceive the Quraysh assassins who were watching the house, making them think Muhammad was still inside. Ali was also entrusted with returning all the valuable items that Meccans, despite their hostility, had still left in the Prophet's safekeeping, fulfilling his reputation as Al-Amin right to the very end.
Incredible. So they slipped away.
They slipped away under the cover of darkness. They didn't head directly north towards Medina immediately. Instead, they hid for 3 days in a small cave, Thar Cave, on a mountain south of Mecca to throw off their pursuers. The Quraysh launched a massive search. At one point, pursuers came right to the mouth of the cave. Abu Bakr became extremely fearful, whispering, "O Messenger of Allah, if they look down at their feet, they will see us." But the Prophet, with complete trust in God, reassured him, "La tazan, inna Allaha ma'ana, do not grieve, indeed Allah is with us." Miraculously, the pursuers didn't enter the cave. Traditional accounts mention a spider weaving a web across the entrance and a dove nesting there, convincing them no one could be inside. After the immediate danger subsided, they continued their arduous journey north, guided by Abdullah ibn Urayqit, an experienced guy who was not a Muslim but was trusted for the task.
And their arrival in Medina.
Their arrival in Medina on the 12th of Rabi's al-Awwal in the 13th year of prophethood, around 622 CE, was met with immense joy and celebration by the people of Medina who had eagerly awaited him. Their first stop on the outskirts of Medina was an area called Quba. There, the Prophet stayed for several days and immediately initiated the building of the very first mosque in Islam, Masjid Quba. This act itself signified the centrality of worship, community, and establishing Islamic presence right from the outset.
So, arriving in this new city, Medina, with its mix of Meccan immigrants, Muhajirun, and local Medinan helpers, Ansar, plus existing Jewish tribes, how did the Prophet go about transforming this diverse population into a cohesive, functioning state? What were the immediate practical steps he took?
His actions upon settling in Medina were incredibly strategic and foundational for building not just a community, but a nascent state. There were 3 key initiatives almost immediately. First, as he did in Quba, he initiated the building of the Prophet's mosque, Masjid an-Nabawi, in the center of Medina. He purchased the land, which happened to belong to two orphan boys, whom he insisted on paying fairly, and then he actively participated in the construction himself, carrying bricks and stones alongside his companions. This mosque wasn't just a place for the 5 daily prayers, it became the absolute heart of the community, a place of learning, a community center, the seat of governance where delegations were received and disputes were settled, a space for social welfare activities. It physically and spiritually anchored the new Muslim society.
Okay, building a central hub makes sense. What else?
Second, and critically important for social harmony and integration, was the formal establishment of brotherhood, mu'akha. The Prophet paired up individual muhajirun, the immigrants from Mecca who had left everything behind, homes, wealth, businesses, with individual ansar, the helpers from Medina who would welcome them. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a deep practical bond. The Ansar literally shared their homes, their wealth, their food, their businesses with their designated muhajir brother. It was an unprecedented act of solidarity based purely on faith, transcending the old tribal and familial loyalties. This mu'akha fostered incredible social cohesion, mutual responsibility, and effectively integrated the poor Meccan immigrants into the economic and social fabric of Medina. It prevented resentment and created a unified community.
That's quite something. And the third initiative?
The third major step was the establishment of the Medina document, often referred to by modern scholars as the Constitution of Medina. This was a formal written agreement, a charter, drafted by the Prophet shortly after arriving. Its purpose was to regulate the affairs and relationships among the various groups in Medina. The Muhajirun, the Ansar, specifically their main tribes, the Aus and Khazraj, and significantly, the main Jewish tribes residing in Medina. The significance of this document cannot be overstated. It laid down clear principles for community life, defining the community of believers, ummah, as distinct but inclusive, establishing mutual defense responsibilities, guaranteeing religious freedom, especially for the Jews, to the Jews their religion, and to the Muslims their religion, outlining procedures for justice and settling disputes, and implicitly asserting the Prophet's authority as the ultimate arbiter in disagreements. It was essentially a sophisticated social contract, a blueprint for a pluralistic state, remarkably advanced for its time.
So establishing the mosque, the brotherhood, and this constitution, that really lays the groundwork. But this Medinan period also saw significant military engagements, the Ghazwat and Saraya. How did these fit into the picture? How did they define the new state and its approach to conflict?
Yes, the military engagements were a defining feature of the Medinan period, but it's crucial, as our sources emphasize, to understand their context and purpose. They weren't primarily about aggression or conquest for its own sake. Their purpose was mainly twofold. First, defense. The Quraish in Mecca had not forgiven the Muslims for leaving and establishing a base in Medina. They saw Medina as a threat and launched attacks to destroy the nascent Muslim state. So many early battles were purely defensive. Second, these engagements aimed to remove obstacles to the peaceful spread of Islam and to protect the Muslim community from external threats and internal treachery. They also served to establish a model for ethical and honorable warfare, with strict rules of engagement, as we touched upon earlier. A distinction is usually made between Ghazwat battles or expeditions where the Prophet Muhammad was personally present and leading, and Saraya, smaller expeditions or reconnaissance missions sent out under the command of one of his companions.
Can you give us some examples of the key Ghazwat?
Certainly. The Medinan period saw several crucial defensive and strategic engagements that shaped the early Islamic State. The first major battle was Badr, fought in the second year after Hijra, 2 AH 624 CE. It started when the Muslims attempted to intercept a large Quraish merchant caravan returning from Syria, partly to recoup some of the wealth confiscated from them in Mecca. The Quraish sent a large army, about 1,000 men, to protect the caravan and confront the Muslims. The Muslims, numbering only around 313, met them at Badr. Despite being heavily outnumbered and out-equipped, the Muslims achieved a stunning and decisive victory. Many key Quraysh leaders were killed, and many others were captured. Badr was a huge morale boost and established the Muslims as a force to be reckoned with.
A turning point for sure. What came next?
The Quraysh were determined to avenge their defeat at Badr. The following year, 3 AH 625 CE, they marched on Medina with a larger army, around 3,000 men, for the Battle of Uhud. The Muslims, about 700, met them outside the city near Mount Uhud. Initially, the Muslims gained the upper hand. However, a strategic mistake occurred when a group of archers positioned by the Prophet on a hill to protect the flank abandoned their post prematurely, thinking the battle was won, in order to seek spoils. This allowed the Quraysh cavalry, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, who later became a famous Muslim general, to attack the Muslim rear. The tide turned, the Muslims suffered significant losses, including the Prophet's uncle Hamza, and the Prophet himself was injured. While not a decisive defeat, Uhud served as a harsh but vital lesson in the importance of discipline, obedience, and patience in the face of adversity.
So a setback, but a lesson learned. What about the Battle of the Trench? That sounds defensive.
Very much so. The Battle of Al-Asab, the Confederates, also known as the Battle of the Trench, Khandak, took place in the 5th year after Hijra, 5 AH 627 CE. This was a major test. Several forces hostile to Islam, including the Quraysh from Mecca and various other Arab tribes, instigated partly by the Jewish tribe of Banu Nadir, who had been expelled from Medina earlier for treachery, formed a massive Confederate army, perhaps 10,000 strong, to lay siege to Medina and annihilate the Muslims once and for all. Faced with this overwhelming force, the Muslims adopted an innovative defensive strategy suggested by a Persian companion, Salman al-Farsi. Based on Persian military tactics unfamiliar to the Arabs, they dug a large defensive trench across the exposed northern approach to Medina, effectively preventing the Confederate cavalry from charging. The siege lasted for nearly a month. There were some skirmishes and duels, but no full-scale battle. The trench held, the Confederates grew weary and disunited, and eventually harsh weather conditions, strong winds that blew out their fires and tents, combined with internal dissent, led the Confederate army to break the siege and withdraw in disarray. This was a major strategic victory for the Muslims, achieved largely through defensive ingenuity and endurance, demonstrating the resilience of the Medinan state.
That trench idea was brilliant. You mentioned the Banu Nadir being expelled earlier. Were there other conflicts with the Jewish tribes in Medina?
Yes, the relationship with some of the Jewish tribes in Medina unfortunately deteriorated over time, primarily due to, according to Islamic sources, repeated treaty violations and collaboration with the Muslims' enemies. We mentioned the Banu Nadir, who were expelled in the 4th year AH after allegedly plotting to assassinate the Prophet. Immediately following the Battle of the Trench, attention turned to the Banu Qurayza, another major Jewish tribe in Medina. During the critical siege of the Trench, the Banu Qurayza, despite their treaty obligations with the Muslims, reportedly colluded with the besieging Confederate army, betraying the Muslims at their most vulnerable moment. After the Confederates withdrew, the Muslims laid siege to the Banu Qurayza's strongholds. They eventually surrendered and agreed to accept the judgment of Sa'd ibn Wad, the leader of the Aus tribe, who had been their allies before Islam. Sa'd, who is dying from a wound sustained during the trench battle, judged according to their own law, the Torah, some sources say, for treason of this nature during wartime, that the men should be executed, the women and children taken captive, and their property confiscated. This judgment was carried out. It was a harsh outcome, reflecting the severity of the perceived betrayal during a moment of existential threat.
A difficult part of the history. Now, moving forward, the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah sounds different, more diplomatic.
Absolutely. The Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, 6 AH 628 CE, was a landmark diplomatic achievement, even though its terms initially seemed unfavorable to the Muslims. The Prophet had a dream that he and his companions were performing the Umrah, lesser pilgrimage, peacefully in Mecca. Based on this vision, he set out towards Mecca with about 1,400 Muslims, unarmed except for travelers' swords, intending only to perform the pilgrimage. However, the Quraish, still hostile, prevented them from entering Mecca. Tensions rose, and lengthy negotiations took place at a spot called Hudaybiyah, just outside the city. At one point, when the Prophet's envoy to Mecca, Uthman ibn Affan, was delayed, a rumor spread that he had been killed. In response, the Muslims made a pledge under a tree known as the Pledge of Ridwan, Pledge of Good Pleasure, swearing allegiance to the Prophet, vowing not to flee and to fight to the death if necessary. This display of unity and resolve strengthened the Prophet's negotiating position.
What were the terms of the treaty?
The final treaty included several key terms. 1. The Muslims would return to Medina that year without performing Umrah, but could come back the following year for 3 days. 2. A truce of 10 years would be established between the Muslims and Quraysh. 3. Critically, if anyone from Quraysh fled to join the Muslims in Medina without their guardian's permission, they had to be returned to Mecca. However, if a Muslim fled from Medina to Mecca, they would not be returned. 4. Tribes were free to ally themselves with either the Muslims or the Quraysh. The Khuzā tribe immediately allied with the Muslims, while the Banu Bakr allied with Quraysh. This would become important later.
That third point sounds really one-sided against the Muslims.
It did seem that way initially, and many companions were deeply unhappy about it. However, the Prophet accepted the terms, guided by divine insight, and history proved it to be a strategic masterstroke. The Quran itself later referred to Hudaybiyah as a clear victory, Fath Mubin, in Surah Al-Fath. Why? Because the treaty brought a period of peace, it implicitly recognized the Muslim state in Medina as an equal negotiating partner with Mecca. It allowed for the free movement and interaction between people, which led to many Meccans observing Islam firsthand and converting peacefully. It opened the door for the message to spread far more effectively than warfare could have achieved at that point. It demonstrated the Prophet's wisdom, patience, and long-term vision.
Okay, so Hudaybiyah paved the way for peace, relatively speaking. What other major campaigns happened after that?
Following Hudaybiyah, several important campaigns took place. The Battle of Khaybar, 7 AH 628 CE, was against the powerful Jewish tribes residing in the fertile oasis of Khaybar north of Medina. These tribes were seen as posing a continuing threat, having allegedly conspired with enemies like the Confederates. The Muslims besieged and conquered their formidable forts, neutralizing the threat and gaining significant resources. The Battle of Mu'tah, 8 AH 629 CE, was a first major encounter between the Muslims and the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. It occurred in present-day Jordan when a Muslim envoy carrying a letter from the Prophet to the Byzantine governor of Busra was intercepted and killed by a Ghassanid chief allied with the Byzantines. This was a grave violation of diplomatic norms. The Prophet dispatched an army of 3,000 men. He appointed successive commanders, Zayd ibn Haritha, then Jafar ibn Abi Talib, then Abdullah ibn Rawaha. All three were martyred in the fierce battle against a vastly larger Byzantine and allied Arab Christian force. Khalid ibn al-Walid then took command, skillfully reorganized the troops, fought bravely, and managed a strategic withdrawal, saving the Muslim army from annihilation while inflicting significant losses on the enemy. Though not a conquest, Musa demonstrated the Muslims' courage and willingness to challenge even the superpowers of the day.
In Hunain and Tabuk.
The Battle of Hunain, 8 AH 630 CE, took place shortly after the peaceful conquest of Mecca, which we'll get to. Some hostile Bedouin tribes, primarily the Hawazin and Thaqif from Taif, refused to accept the Muslim ascendancy and gathered a large army to attack. The Muslims marched out to meet them with a force of 12,000, including 2,000 new converts from Mecca. Initially, the Muslims suffered a setback. Some sources mention that their large numbers perhaps led to overconfidence. They were ambushed in a narrow pass and fell into disarray. However, the Prophet himself remained steadfast, rallying his core companions around him. This stemmed the panic, the Muslim forces regrouped, and they eventually achieved a decisive victory, capturing immense spoils. Hunain served as a lesson against complacency. Finally, the expedition of Tabuk, 9 AH 631 CE, was the largest military expedition undertaken during the Prophet's lifetime. It was prompted by rumors that the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius was amassing a huge army in the north to attack Arabia. The Prophet mobilized a massive army, perhaps 30,000 men, and marched north to Tabuk, near the Byzantine border, during a time of extreme heat and hardship, known as the Army of Hardship. They stayed at Tabuk for about 20 days. However, the rumored Byzantine invasion never materialized. No actual fighting occurred. The sheer scale of the mobilization, however, demonstrated the strength and reach of the Islamic State, deterred potential enemies, and consolidated Muslim influence in northern Arabia. The Prophet then returned to Medina.
Wow, a lot of conflict, but often defensive or strategic. Beyond the military aspect, you mentioned the Prophet engaging in international diplomacy after Hudaybiyah. What did that look like?
Yes, the period of relative peace secured by the Treaty of Hudaybiyah allowed the Prophet to shift focus toward spreading the message of Islam beyond the Arabian Peninsula. This took the form of letters to kings and princes. He dispatched official envoys carrying letters to the major rulers and governors of the surrounding empires and regions, formally inviting them to embrace Islam. This was a bold move, demonstrating the universal nature of his mission. Examples include a letter to Negus, Ashma, the king of Abyssinia, who, according to Islamic tradition, accepted Islam. A letter to Muqawqis, the patriarch or governor of Egypt under Byzantine rule. He treated the envoy respectfully, sent gifts, including Maria al-Qibtiyya, who later bore the Prophet's son Ibrahim, but did not convert. A letter to Chosroes II, Khosrow Parviz, the Sasanian emperor of Persia. He arrogantly tore up the letter. When the Prophet heard this, he reportedly said, "May Allah tear up his kingdom," a prophecy seen as fulfilled later when the Persian Empire crumbled. A letter to Heraclius, the Byzantine emperor. Heraclius received the letter while in Syria after his victory over the Persians. Accounts suggest he questioned Abu Sufyan, who happened to be trading there, about Muhammad, recognized the signs of prophethood, and was intellectually convinced of his sincerity, but ultimately did not convert, possibly due to pressure from his court and clergy. Letters were also sent to the rulers of Bahrain, Yamama in Central Arabia, Damascus, Ghassanid ruler, and Oman, among others, eliciting various responses from acceptance to polite refusal to hostility.
So the message was going global in a sense.
Absolutely. It marked a shift from consolidating the base in Arabia to announcing the message to the known world.
And you mentioned earlier that after the conquest of Mecca, delegations started coming to Medina.
Yes, that's another important feature of the later Medinan period, especially in the 9th and 10th years after Hijra, known as the Year of Delegations, al-Wufud. Following the conquest of Mecca, which cemented Muslim dominance in Arabia, delegations, wufud, from tribes all across the peninsula began arriving in Medina. There were over 70 such delegations recorded. They came to meet the Prophet, pledge allegiance, announce their tribe's conversion to Islam, and learn about the religion directly from him. This influx of delegations signified the widespread acceptance of Islam throughout Arabia, and the political unification of the peninsula under the banner of Islam, largely achieved peacefully through diplomacy and conviction after the fall of Mecca.
And this period culminates in the farewell pilgrimage.
Yes. The culmination of his mission in terms of establishing the rights of Islam and delivering his final major public address was the farewell pilgrimage, Hajjat al-Wada. In the 10th year after Hijra, 632 CE, the Prophet announced his intention to perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. A massive number of Muslims, perhaps over 100,000, gathered to perform the pilgrimage with him, learning the correct rituals directly from his practice. During this pilgrimage on the plains of Arafat, he delivered his profound farewell sermon. This sermon is considered a cornerstone of Islamic teachings, summarizing key ethical, social, and legal principles. Some of the key messages included the sanctity of life, property, and honor, the finality of his prophethood, the importance of adhering strictly to the Quran and his Sunnah, his practice and teachings, as the sources of guidance, the prohibition of usury, riba, the emphasis on justice and equality, declaring that no Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, nor white over black, except by piety, taqwa. And crucially, he emphasized the rights of women, urging men to treat their wives kindly and fulfill their responsibilities towards them. He concluded by asking, "Have I delivered the message?" And the vast crowd roared back, "Yes." He then called upon God to bear witness. It was a powerful, comprehensive, final testament to his community. The grand victory, the conquest of Mecca.
This brings us to that monumental event we've hinted at, the conquest of Mecca. It feels like more than just a military campaign. It seems to embody so much of his character, the mercy, the strategy, the ultimate triumph of his mission.
You're absolutely right. The conquest of Mecca, which took place in the 8th year of Hijra during Ramadan, around January 630 CE, was far more than a simple military victory. It's often called Al-Fath al-Azam, the Great Conquest, precisely because it was achieved almost entirely without bloodshed and was characterized by the Prophet's strategic genius, his unwavering commitment to peace where possible, and above all, his profound mercy and forgiveness. It was the culmination of his struggle against the Quraish opposition.
What triggered it? I thought the Treaty of Hudaybiyah established a 10-year truce.
It did. But the background and reasons for the conquest lie squarely in the violation of that very treaty by the Quraysh and their allies. Remember, under the terms of Hudaybiyah, tribes could ally with either side. The Banu Hazza allied with the Muslims, and the Banu Bakr allied with Quraysh. About 2 years into the truce, in blatant violation of it, the Banu Bakr attacked the Khuzā tribe at night. Critically, sources state they did this with hidden support weapons and even fighters from some elements within Quraysh itself. Several Khuzā members were killed. Amr ibn Salim al-Khuzai, a leader of the attacked tribe, immediately rode to Medina and stood before the Prophet in the mosque, reciting verses that pleaded for help and described the treacherous attack. The Prophet, deeply moved and recognizing the treaty had been broken, declared unequivocally, "You are helped, O Amr ibn Salim." The Quraysh leaders in Mecca quickly realized the gravity of their allies' actions and their own complicity. They knew they had broken the treaty and feared the consequences. Their leader, Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, who hadn't yet converted, rushed to Medina himself, attempting to patch things up and renew the treaty. He tried talking to the Prophet, then saw intercession from Abu Bakr, Umar, and even the Prophet's daughter Fatima, but his efforts were firmly rebuffed. The decision to act had been made.
So the Prophet decided to march on Mecca. What were the Muslim preparations like? You said he aimed for minimal bloodshed. How did the preparation reflect that?
The Prophet's preparations were marked by exceptional secrecy and brilliant strategy, all aimed at achieving the objective reclaiming Mecca for Islam and purifying the Kaaba with the least possible resistance and bloodshed. Firstly, he kept his destination absolutely secret. He mobilized a large force but didn't tell anyone, not even his closest companions like Abu Bakr or his wife Aisha, where they were heading initially. This prevented Quraysh from preparing defenses or mustering a large opposing force. Secondly, he employed diversions. He sent a small expeditionary force in a completely different direction towards Idham to deliberately mislead Quraysh spies about his true intentions, making them think he was heading elsewhere. Thirdly, the mobilization itself was impressive. He gathered a massive army, drawing contingents from Medina and allied Bedouin tribes who had embraced Islam. The force numbered around 10,000 men, the largest Muslim army assembled to date. The sheer size was also part of the strategy to overawe Mecca into submission rather than fighting.
Was there any risk of the plan leaking?
There was one concerning incident. A companion named Hatib ibn Abi Balta, who had family remaining in Mecca, feared for their safety. Out of misguided concern, he wrote a letter to Quraysh informing them of the impending Muslim advance and gave it to a woman to deliver. However, Allah informed the Prophet about this letter through revelation. The Prophet immediately dispatched Ali and Zubair, who intercepted the woman and recovered the letter. Hatib was brought before the Prophet, deeply ashamed. He explained he hadn't acted out of apostasy or betrayal, but solely out of fear for his unprotected family in Mecca, hoping to gain some favor with Quraysh. The Prophet, recognizing his past service, he was a veteran of Badr, and accepting his explanation, remarkably forgave him. This incident highlighted both divine protection of the mission and the Prophet's capacity for understanding and forgiveness. It also led to the revelation of the opening verses of Surah Al-Mumtahana, warning believers against taking enemies as allies.
Forgiveness even in a moment like that. Okay, what about the actual march to Mecca? Were there other notable moments of forgiveness or reconciliation along the way?
Yes, the march itself had significant moments. The army departed Medina on the 10th of Ramadan, 8 AH. They fasted initially, but later the Prophet permitted them to break the fast due to the hardship of the journey. En route near Mecca, the Prophet was joyfully reunited with his uncle Al-Abbas, who had finally left Mecca with his family to formally migrate to the Muslim side just before the conquest. Also, as they neared Mecca, two individuals who had been among his bitterest personal enemies came out hoping for forgiveness. Abu Sufyan ibn Harith, who was the Prophet's first cousin but had relentlessly satirized him in poetry, and Abdullah ibn Umayyah, another cousin, and also his brother-in-law, who had severely mocked and opposed him in Mecca. Initially, the Prophet turned away from them due to the depth of their past enmity, but after Ali advised them on how to approach the Prophet humbly, and seeing their sincere repentance, the Prophet's inherent magnanimity won out, and he forgave them both, accepting their embrace of Islam. This again showed his willingness to forgive even deep personal wrongs.
And then came that moment at Mar al-Zahran with the 10,000 fires.
Exactly. As the massive Muslim army camped at Mar al-Azran, an oasis just a short distance from Mecca, night fell. Here, the Prophet ordered every single soldier to light a separate campfire. So 10,000 fires suddenly blazed across the hillsides, illuminating the entire horizon. This wasn't just for cooking. It was a brilliant act of psychological warfare. The intended effect was to create an awe-inspiring, overwhelming spectacle that would completely demoralize the Quraysh leadership and the people of Mecca, making any thought of resistance seem utterly futile. The goal was to encourage a peaceful surrender, to avoid fighting within the sacred city.
And it was here that Abu Sufyan, the leader of Mecca, the Prophet's longtime adversary, finally came face to face with the reality of the situation, leading to his conversion.
Precisely. The sight of those 10,000 fires terrified Abu Sufyan, who had crept out of Mecca with a couple of companions to try and gather intelligence. He realized Mecca stood no chance. At this critical moment, the Prophet's uncle, Al-Abbas, who knew Abu Sufyan well, found him in the dark. Concerned for the fate of Mecca if resistance occurred, Abbas offered Abu Sufyan protection and took him to the Prophet's tent. Inside the tent, Umar ibn al-Khattab, seeing his archenemy, initially wanted to execute him on the spot for his long history of hostility. But Abbas asserted his protection. The Prophet then spoke patiently with Abu Sufyan throughout the night. He gently but firmly questioned his continued adherence to idols that could neither help nor harm, presenting the truth of Islam. Under Abbas's urging, overwhelmed by the undeniable power before him and perhaps finally recognizing the truth he had long resisted, Abu Sufyan eventually bore witness. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. He embraced Islam.
A huge moment. And this led to the declaration of amnesty.
Yes, the conversion of Mecca's primary leader was followed by a pivotal declaration of amnesty, a testament to the Prophet's political genius and unparalleled mercy. Al-Abbas, wanting some honor for his now converted friend Abu Sufyan, who was known to love status, asked the Prophet to grant him something. So the Prophet declared, "Whoever enters the house of Abu Sufyan is safe." And he added, "Whoever locks his door behind him is safe, and whoever enters the sacred mosque, the Kaaba, is safe." This incredible, comprehensive pardon, announced before the army even entered the city, was revolutionary. After 2 decades of persecution, warfare, loss, and betrayal initiated by Quraish, the Prophet offered safety and security to almost everyone. This saved countless lives, protected property, and prevented the cycle of revenge and bloodshed that typically accompanied conquests in that era. Before the main army moved in, Abu Sufyan was positioned by Abbas at a narrow pass where he could witness the disciplined, powerful Muslim battalions marching by tribe, further solidifying the message. Resistance was futile, but mercy was offered.
So with this amnesty declared, how did the actual entry into Mecca unfold? Was there any fighting at all?
The entry into Mecca itself was executed with meticulous planning to ensure peace. The army, all 10,000 strong, was divided into 4 main columns, each assigned to enter Mecca from a different direction simultaneously. This strategy prevented Quraysh from being able to mass any significant resistance in one place and effectively paralyze any last-minute thoughts of fighting back. 3 of the columns, led by commanders like Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, and Sa'd ibn Ubadah. Though Sa'd initially made a belligerent statement and was temporarily relieved of his standard, entered their assigned sectors completely peacefully, encountering no opposition. Only one column, led by the formidable warrior Khalid ibn al-Walid, entering from the lower part of Mecca, encountered some minor resistance. A small group of die-hard Quraysh opponents, led by figures like Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, son of the notorious Abu Jahl, and Safwan ibn Umayyah, tried to make a stand at a place called Al-Kandamar. A brief clash ensued, resulting in about 12 or 13 Qurayshi deaths and the martyrdom of 2 Muslims. Khalid quickly overcame this resistance, and then his column also proceeded peacefully.
So overwhelmingly peaceful. How did the Prophet himself enter?
The Prophet's own entry was deeply symbolic. He entered from the upper part of Mecca, riding his camel, Al-Qaswa. But he didn't enter like a triumphant conqueror. Instead, his head was bowed low in humility and gratitude to Allah, so low that his beard almost touched the saddle. He was reciting verses from Surah Al-Fath, Victory, acknowledging that the victory came only from God. He wore a simple black turban, not armor, and had Usama ibn Zayd, the son of his freed slave, riding behind him on the same camel, a powerful visual statement against the arrogance and social hierarchies that had defined pre-Islamic Mecca.
Humility and victory. What were his first actions upon reaching the Kaaba, the very center they had been exiled from?
Upon reaching the sacred mosque, the Prophet proceeded directly to the Kaaba. It was at that time surrounded by and filled with hundreds of idols. Sources mention 360 idols in total, representing the pantheon worshipped by the Arabs. He performed tawaf, circumambulation, around the Kaaba on his camel. Then, with a bow or stick in his hand, he began pointing at each idol, striking them, reciting the powerful verse from the Quran, Surah Al-Isra 81. "Truth has come and falsehood has vanished. Indeed, falsehood is ever bound to vanish." And another verse, Surah Saba 49. "Truth has come, and falsehood can neither originate nor restore anything." As he struck them, the idols reportedly fell down on their faces. He then ordered that all the idols, images, and statues inside the Kaaba itself be removed and destroyed. He refused to enter the Kaaba until it was completely purified of all vestiges of idolatry. Once cleansed, he entered the Kaaba, accompanied by Bilal, Usama ibn Zayd, and Uthman ibn Talha, the traditional key holder of the Kaaba. Inside, he prayed 2 units of prayer, rakas, and proclaimed the greatness of God.
What about the key to the Kaaba? That was a position of honor.
Yes, the hereditary role of keyholder, Sadin, of the Kaaba belonged to the family of Banu Shayba, specifically Uthman ibn Talha at that time. After purifying the Kaaba, the Prophet called for Uthman. Some companions might have expected the Prophet to take the key for himself or give it to his own clan. Instead, in a remarkable act demonstrating the principle of fulfilling trusts, Amanah, the Prophet returned the key to Uthman ibn Talha. He reportedly said, "Take it, O Banu Talha, eternally, till the day of resurrection, and it will not be taken from you unless by an unjust, oppressive tyrant." This act reaffirmed a pre-Islamic right and underscored the Islamic value of trustworthiness.
And then came the call to prayer from Bilal.
Yes, that was an incredibly powerful and symbolic moment. At the time for the noon prayer, the Prophet commanded Bilal ibn Rabah, the Abyssinian former slave, who had endured horrific torture in Mecca for saying, "Ahad, Ahad, one God, one God," to ascend to the very top of the Kaaba and deliver the Adhan, the Islamic call to prayer. Imagine the scene. This black man, once tortured for his faith, now standing atop the most sacred structure in Arabia, proclaiming the supremacy of Allah and the prophethood of Muhammad over the city that had persecuted him. It was a profound symbol of the triumph of monotheism over idolatry and of equality over the racial and social hierarchies of the old order. The sound of Bilal's resonant adhan echoing through Mecca must have been electrifying. Sources mention that some Quraishi leaders who hadn't yet fully embraced Islam, like Abu Sufyan himself, Attab ibn Asid, and Harith ibn Hisham, were sitting nearby and made some quiet, cynical remarks amongst themselves about the turn of events. The Prophet, informed by revelation of their private conversation, confronted them with their exact words, which stunned them into affirming his prophethood.
Incredible. And the most impactful result, perhaps, was that general amnesty and its impact, especially on those who had actively fought against him for so long. How did that specific moment play out?
That moment, when the Prophet addressed the assembled Quraish after purifying the Kaaba, is perhaps the most defining characteristic of the conquest of Mecca and a pinnacle of his merciful character. He gathered them near the Kaaba, the very people who had plotted against him, persecuted his followers, driven them from their homes, and fought wars against them for 2 decades. He looked at them and posed that profound question. "O people of Quraish, what do you think I will do to you?" They were his captives, completely at his mercy. They knew what conquerors usually did. But perhaps remembering his lifelong reputation for kindness or hoping for the best, they replied, "We expect good. You are a noble brother, the son of a noble brother." Then the Prophet Muhammad delivered his historic, magnanimous reply, echoing the words of Prophet Yusuf, to his brothers who had wronged him, as narrated in the Quran Surah Yusuf 92. La tatriba alaykum al-yawm idhabu fantum at-talaqa. No reproach shall be on you this day. Go, for you are all free.
Just like that. Free.
Just like that. A complete and total general pardon. It was astounding. This act of mass forgiveness saved countless lives from execution or enslavement, protected their property and lands, and decisively broke the cycle of revenge and tribal vendetta that had plagued Arabia for centuries. It exemplified Islam's core value of mercy in the most dramatic way possible. This approach starkly contrasted with the brutal norms of conquest prevalent in that era and throughout much of history, and his impact was immediate and transformative. Witnessing this unparalleled magnanimity after years of their own hostility led to the mass conversion of the Meccans. They entered Islam in droves, men and women, freely and willingly, not out of coercion, but out of genuine conviction and awe inspired by the Prophet's character. It fulfilled the Quranic prophecy mentioned earlier, and you see the people entering into the religion of Allah in multitudes. Surah An-Nasr 2.
Were there any particularly notable conversions among the former enemies?
Yes, several key figures, who had been staunch opponents right up until the conquest, embraced Islam in its wake, illustrating the power of the Prophet's forgiveness. Safwan ibn Umayyah, a major Quraishi chief who had actively fought the Muslims and whose execution might have been expected. He initially fled Mecca. His relative, Umayyad ibn Wahab, requested amnesty for him from the Prophet, which was granted. The Prophet even gave Umayyad his own turban as a sign of safe passage for Safwan. Safwan returned, still hesitant, and asked for time to consider Islam. The Prophet granted him several months. Impressed by the Prophet's generosity, especially after the Battle of Hunayn's spoils distribution, Safwan eventually embraced Islam sincerely. Suhail ibn Amr. He was the eloquent Quraishi negotiator at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, representing the hardline stance against the Muslims then. He also feared for his life after the conquest, but locked himself in his house. His sons sought amnesty for him, which the Prophet readily granted, praising Suhail's intelligence. Suhail later became a devout Muslim. Perhaps most striking is Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl. He was the son of Abu Jahl, arguably the single fiercest enemy of Islam in Mecca, the father of ignorance. Ikrimah himself had fought Muslims intensely. After the conquest, he fled towards Yemen, intending to take a boat to Abyssinia. However, his wife, Hakim, who had converted, courageously went to the Prophet and secured amnesty for him. She then pursued Ikrimah and convinced him to return. When Ikrimah approached, the Prophet stood up and greeted him joyfully, without his cloak in his haste, saying, "Welcome, O migrating rider." He completely forgave Ikrimah, despite his father's legacy and his own past actions. Ikrimah became a zealous Muslim and died later fighting for Islam. There are other stories too. Abu Qafa, the elderly blind father of Abu Bakr, was led to the Prophet and embraced Islam. The Prophet kindly suggested he dye his white hair. Fadala ibn Umayr apparently approached the Prophet during Tawaf, intending to assassinate him, but the Prophet, knowing his thoughts, placed his hand on Fadala's chest, and Fadala's ill intention vanished, replaced instantly by faith. Poets who had satirized him, like Abdullah ibn al-Zibara and Anas ibn Zanama, also came seeking forgiveness and were pardoned upon embracing Islam.
It's just forgiveness after forgiveness. What were the overall results of this conquest?
The results were profound and far-reaching. 1. Mecca, the spiritual and historical heart of Arabia, came definitively under Muslim influence and was peacefully integrated into the Islamic State. 2. The power and prestige of the Quraish tribe, which had dominated Arabian politics and trade for so long, was effectively diminished, though they remained respected. 3. The Muslims became the undisputed dominant force in the Arabian Peninsula. 4. Most importantly, the Prophet's long-held wish for his own people, the Quraysh, to embrace Islam was fulfilled, largely without coercion. This removed the main obstacle to the peaceful spread of Islam throughout the rest of Arabia, leading directly to that year of delegations we discussed. The conquest was truly the decisive turning point.
The man and his legacy. Characteristics, household, and past. We've covered the grand narrative, the mission, the struggles, the state building, the final victory in Mecca. It's an epic story. But let's zoom back in on the man at the center of it all. What kind of person was he, beyond the public figure as a prophet and leader? What were his personal qualities that inspired such devotion and allowed him to achieve all this?
That's essential because his character is presented as inseparable from his message. Our sources provide a really rich tapestry of the Prophet's qualities, covering both his physical appearance and, more importantly, his moral character and manners. Ahak. Regarding his physical qualities, kilkia, descriptions from those who knew him paint a picture of someone pleasing to look upon. He was of medium height, neither conspicuously tall nor short. He had a broad build, a clear, resonant voice, and a complexion described as fair with a hint of redness, not pale, but radiant. He was considered exceptionally handsome, with a noble face, slightly arched eyebrows that weren't joined, and deep black eyes with long lashes.
A striking presence, it sounds like. But it's the inner qualities that matter more.
Absolutely. It's his moral qualities, khuluqiyya, that truly stand out and are emphasized as central to his mission. The Quran itself says he was sent as a mercy to the worlds, and addresses him saying, "And indeed you are of a great moral character." He himself said, "I was sent to perfect noble manners."
So what were some of those key manners and qualities?
Well, first and foremost was his legendary truthfulness. As we've repeated, even before prophethood, his lifelong nickname was Al-Sadiq Al-Amin. The truthful, the trustworthy. This wasn't just about words, it permeated his actions, his intentions, his dealings. Absolute integrity. His capacity for forgiveness and pardon was extraordinary, as we saw vividly in the conquest of Mecca, but also in countless smaller incidents. He consistently forgave those who harmed him personally, even when he had the power to retaliate. There's that famous story of the Bedouin who grabbed him violently by his cloak, demanding money, leaving a mark on his neck. The Prophet simply smiled and ordered that the man be given what he asked for. Another time, a man came at him with a sword while he was resting alone under a tree and asked, "Who will protect you from me now?" The Prophet calmly replied, "Allah." The man was so taken aback, he dropped his sword. The Prophet picked it up, asked the man the same question, and then simply let him go when the man pleaded for mercy.
Incredible restraint and mercy.
Truly. Then there was his immense generosity. Companions described him as the most generous of all people, like a sent wind that brings rain and goodness without holding anything back. His generosity reportedly increased even more during the month of Ramadan. He never turned away someone in need if he had something to give, often giving away his own food or belongings. Coupled with this was profound humility. Despite his status as a prophet and leader, he was never arrogant or condescending. He rejected any special treatment. He would sit among his companions without any designated high seat, making it sometimes difficult for newcomers to identify him. He would mend his own clothes, repair his own sandals, help with household chores. He visited the sick, attended funerals, accepted invitations to meals even from the poor, and would ride a simple donkey. This deep humility endeared him to everyone.
That accessibility must have been key.
Absolutely. He also maintained remarkable purity of speech. He was never vulgar, abusive, insulting, or overly talkative. Anas ibn Malik, who served him closely for 10 years as a young boy, testified, "The messenger of Allah was not vulgar, nor a cursor, nor an insulter. He spoke concisely and meaningfully. His respect for elders and compassion for children were also hallmarks of his character. He showed great respect towards older people and immense tenderness towards children. He would often kiss his grandchildren, play with them, let them ride on his back during prayer sometimes. He taught compassion through his example. And finally, his deep modesty, haya. This wasn't just shyness, but a profound sense of inhibition that prevented him from saying or doing anything improper or indecent. His companions described him as being more modest even than a veiled virgin in her seclusion. This innate modesty guarded his conduct and ensured it remained always upright and exemplary. These qualities, taken together, presented a living embodiment of the Quran's teachings. He wasn't just delivering a message, he was the message in human form, a walking example for all humanity.
These qualities are truly inspiring. What about his personal life then? His family life? How did he embody these qualities within his own home, with his wives and children?
His treatment of his prophetic household is presented in the sources as equally exemplary, a practical model for family life based on the Quranic principles of love, mawadda, mercy, rahmah, and tranquility, sakinah. The Quran says in Surah Ar-Rum, verse 21, "And of his signs is that he created for you from yourselves mates that you may find tranquility in them, and he placed between you affection and mercy." He lived this verse. He showed his companions, through his own actions, how to be kind, considerate, and loving spouses and parents. He consoled his wives when they were upset, appreciated their contributions, praised them, joked with them. Crucially, he wasn't above helping with household chores, mending clothes, milking sheep, helping prepare food. He ate meals with his family, spent quality time with them, and even went on outings or raced with his wife, Aisha. He showed affection openly. His home life was based on mutual respect and kindness.
Who were his wives and children?
Throughout his life, the Prophet married several women, often for reasons beyond just personal companionship, such as strengthening ties with different tribes, providing care for widows of fallen companions, or establishing legal precedents and facilitating the education of women, as his wives could teach other women about private family matters. His first wife, as we know, was the noble Khadija bint Khuwaylid. He married her when he was 25 and she was older, around 40. He remained monogamous with her for the 25 years of their marriage until her death. She was the mother of almost all his children and his greatest support. After Khadija's passing, he married several other women. These included Sauda bint Nizama, an elderly widow he married shortly after Khadija's death. Then Aisha bint Abi Bakr, the daughter of his closest friend, whom he married when she was young. She became his most beloved wife after Khadija and a major scholar and narrator of Hadith. Others included Hafsa bint Umma, Zainab bint Huzaima, known as al-Masakin, mother of the poor, for her charity. She died soon after marrying him. Salama, Zainab bint Jash, whose marriage involved a specific divine legislation. Juwayriya bint al-Harith, Safiya bint Huyay, from the conquered Jewish tribe of Khaybar. Habiba, daughter of Abu Sufyan, and Maimuna bint al-Harith. Sources generally list 11 wives with whom he consummated marriage over the course of his life after Khadija.
And his children?
He was blessed with 7 children in total. From Khadija, he had 2 sons, Al-Qasim, which gave him a kunya, or technonym, Abu al-Qasim, father of Qasim, and Abdullah, also called Tayyib Tahir. Both tragically died in infancy in Mecca. He also had 4 daughters with Khadija, all of whom lived to adulthood, embraced Islam, migrated to Medina, and married prominent companions: Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima. Fatima, the youngest, held a particularly special place in his heart and is revered as a major figure in Islam, the wife of Ali ibn Abi Talib and mother of Hassan and Hussein. Later in Medina, he had one more son, Ibrahim, from his concubine, or wife, sources differ, Maria al-Qibtiyya, the Coptic woman sent as a gift from the ruler of Egypt. Ibrahim also tragically died in infancy, causing the Prophet deep grief. The fact that all his sons died young is often seen as divinely ordained, perhaps to prevent any possibility of a hereditary claim to prophethood or leadership after him.
It's clear his life was just packed with immense purpose, incredible challenges, profound impact on individuals and entire societies. How did this extraordinary journey finally conclude? How did he pass away?
The extraordinary journey of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, concluded in Medina. His passing occurred on Monday the 12th of Rabi's al-Awwal in the 11th year of Hijra, corresponding to June 632 CE. This date is widely accepted in historical accounts, interestingly coinciding with the same date often cited for his birth. His passing followed a period of illness. About 2 weeks before his death, he began suffering from severe headaches and fever. The illness gradually intensified, weakening him considerably. During this final illness, demonstrating his fairness even in sickness, he sought permission from his other wives to be nursed continuously in the apartment of his wife Aisha, which was adjacent to the mosque. They all readily agreed.
Were there any specific moments during that final illness that stand out?
Yes, several poignant moments are recorded. One is a private conversation he had with his beloved daughter, Fatima al-Zahra. She came to visit him while he was very ill. He whispered something in her ear that made her weep intensely. Then he whispered something else that made her laugh. Later, Aisha asked her about it. Fatima explained that the first secret was the Prophet telling her that he would soon die from this illness, which caused her deep sorrow. The second secret was him telling her that she would be the very first member of his family to follow him in death, which brought her joy at the prospect of being reunited with him soon. And indeed, Fatima passed away only a few months after her father. Another moment occurred on the very morning of his death. He seemed to rally slightly. The Muslims were lined up in the mosque for the Fajr prayer, being led by Abu Bakr, whom the Prophet had appointed to lead prayers during his illness. The Prophet managed to draw back the curtain of his room, which opened onto the mosque, and he looked out at his followers, praying in rows. A radiant smile spread across his face, pleased to see them united in worship. The companions were overjoyed, thinking he was recovering and might come out to join them. Abu Bakr even started to step back, thinking the Prophet would lead, but the Prophet gestured for them to continue their prayer and let the curtain fall. This was his final look upon his community at prayer.
And his final moments.
Later that morning, his condition worsened rapidly. He passed away peacefully in the lap of his wife Aisha in her apartment. His age at death is most commonly cited by historians as 63 lunar years old. His passing caused immense shock and grief throughout the Muslim community. Some, like Umar, initially refused to believe he could die. It was Abu Bakr who reminded everyone of the Quranic verse. Muhammad is not but a messenger. Other messengers have passed on before him. So if he was to die or be killed, would you turn back on your heels to unbelief? Al-Imran, bringing perspective and calm.
Where was he buried?
He was washed, shrouded, and prayed over by the Muslims. He was then buried in the very same spot where he passed away, directly under the floor of Aisha's room, adjacent to his mosque. This spot is now enclosed within the Green Dome inside the Prophet's Mosque, Masjid an-Nabawi in Medina, a site visited by millions of Muslims from around the world. His passing marked the end of the era of direct divine revelation, but it signified the completion of his mission, the perfection of the religion, and the solidification of Islam as a complete way of life, leaving the Quran and his Sunnah as the enduring legacy for all humanity. Outro.
Wow. That was truly a comprehensive deep dive into the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Just incredible. We've explored the really profound ways his prophethood is established, from the timeless miracle of the Quran itself, with all its different dimensions we discussed, right through to his impeccable character, Al-Amin, and that extraordinary societal transformation he spearheaded.
Absolutely. We've traced how every phase of his life, really, from his orphan childhood, marked by that inherent purity and wisdom, through the struggles in Mecca, the establishment of the Medinan state, and culminating in the remarkably peaceful conquest of Mecca, how all of it contributed to his profound and lasting legacy. And it's worth reiterating, the authenticity of his biography, as highlighted by our sources, is really rooted in meticulous preservation efforts that began very early on. We have the Quran itself, compiled in written form during his lifetime and formally canonized shortly after his death. And then the Hadith, his sayings and actions, and the Sirah, the biographical accounts, these were collected and scrutinized by scholars from the very first generations of Muslims. These records provide an incredibly detailed and, scholars argue, well-verified account of his life.
So when you put it all together, what does this mean for us today? The sources present this compelling narrative. Here's a man, by all accounts unlettered, living in what was described as a largely ignorant tribal society. Yet he brings forth a scripture of unparalleled literary beauty, filled with what many see as scientific foresight and enduring moral consistency. And at the same time, he transforms that chaotic, warring society into a vibrant, just, and unified civilization in little more than 2 decades. It really raises a profound question for you, the listener, to consider. What does such a unique historical account compel you to think about the nature of divine guidance, human potential, and the possibility of transformation?
Exactly. We really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and maybe provided a solid foundation for understanding this pivotal figure and the faith he brought. This is, of course, merely scratching the surface of a history that is incredibly rich, complex, and deeply meaningful to billions around the world. We really encourage you, if you're interested, to further explore the sources, delve into the aspects that resonated most with you, whether it's the Quran itself, the detailed biographies, or the historical impact. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.